I'm Carla Bengtson, and Every Word Was Once an Animal began several years ago. It's a multi-year, multi-component, and multi-person collaboration. So it began about 4 years ago when my biologist husband, Peter Wetherwax, was telling me about fence lizards. We've collaborated on a lot of projects between human and non-human animals, just trying to understand the life worlds of other creatures, and especially trying to understand culture among other non-human beings, because we're not the only entities in the world that have culture. So fence lizards have culture as well. Fence lizards are common to Oregon and throughout the West Coast as well as the East Coast. They're those little brown lizards. They're also called blue bellies because they have blue on their bellies. And they have evolved a strategy to communicate across distances by using a gestural language. So you've probably seen lizards do a series of head bobs and push-up displays on rocks. And those movements are actually very complicated movement patterns that are learned from friends and family. So they're culturally learned, just as humans learn human language, various forms of human language, not just oral language, but also languages such as American Sign Language, another gestural language. And they, because they are culturally learned, they exhibit not only syntax, that is, they have to have a specific sequence of movements, but also they have very strong dialect. So if you move a fence lizard from its territory into another territory, it actually cannot communicate. So I found out, I started doing research on the fence lizards because this really intrigued me, and I was introduced to Dr. Emilia Martins at Arizona State University, who studies the lizard researchers. And she shared much of her research with me. She's been working with robots, lizard robots, that she takes into the field. And the lizard robots are programmed to copy the movements of the lizards. Different species of lizards have different species-specific movements. And she gave me a lizard robot to work with. And here's a lizard robot that I have replaced the lizard with a human hand that is signaling. It turns out that lizards will respond to anything that mimics their specific patterns of movements. If you know the pattern, you can communicate with the lizard. So this hand robot becomes a kind of prosthetic device with which to communicate with lizards. They'll also respond to human finger bobs. Again, if you know the right pattern of movement, you can actually talk to a lizard. You can learn the embodied language of another creature and talk to a lizard in the field. So I developed this handy hiker's bandana, which I'm also wearing as a bandana, as a face covering during the COVID crisis. And the bandana this is the graph. This is the pattern of the species identification head bob pattern that Scoloporus uta used to identify themselves to one another in the field and to initiate a dialogue. And I've paired this as a sequence of movements. The graph moves up, down, pause, all the way up, halfway down, higher, halfway down, higher, and then all the way down. And that's the movement. And so if you know that movement, you can, or if you don't know it, you can whisk off your hiker's bandana and talk to a lizard by bobbing your finger. And then I've kind of playfully paired this with a human gestural language, American Sign Language on the bottom to spell out lizard. So besides responding to lizard robots and finger bobs, Lizards will also respond to their reflections in mirrors. So I worked with a glass blower to develop these mirrored rocks, which are tools for interspecies communication that can go into the field. And so lizards will respond to their reflection, and you can imaginatively engage a lizard through these mirrored rocks. I also have a lizard lady video of a human performing a series of lizard movements displayed on a rock to go into the field. So you can imaginatively project yourself into the size of a lizard and display on a rock alongside a lizard. So the camouflage wallpaper behind me, I'm interested in camouflage because of its origins in the animal world and predator-prey relations, and humans, of course, have adopted those strategies in wartime. So I'm interested in camouflage because I feel that it's symptomatic of our political moment. We see a lot of people wearing camouflage, and they wear it for different purposes. In some cases, they wear it as a symbol of their patriotism. In other cases, they wear it because they're hunters. In other cases, it's just a fashion accessory, or even a complication of the current moment, a pushback, a protest. But camouflage itself, the primary tactics of camouflage are the purposeful misdirection of truth, strategies of dazzlement and of countershading, and tactics of active confusion, which are certainly symptomatic of our current political moment, and perhaps why we seem to be obsessed with camouflage apparel at the moment. So the camouflage is carried out through the rocks. So the rocks actually mirror the wall. There's a lot of mirroring going on. The exhibition includes interactive dance performances. There will be 4 dancers that enter the exhibition, put on the costumes on the wall, and interact with exhibition goers. And Darion Smith is the choreographer who developed the dance, and he'll tell you something about that. There will also be standalone dance performances and musical performances along with the exhibition.
I'm Darion Smith, dancer, choreographer, and one of the project collaborators on Every Word Was Once an Animal. I wanted to speak a little bit about the dance element in this project, collaborating across disciplines, and what the future holds, how this project has inspired me going forward. So the dance element was also supposed to take place in the focus gallery, where the rest of the artwork is in the sound installation. And basically the public could come into the space and they would be able to learn some movement gestures, which is the language that you could have then a nonverbal communication with the dancers, so a dialogue without words. The dancers will be in the space for half an hour. At the end of that half an hour, and they would stop interacting with the public, and they would have a procession and lead the public into a larger adjacent gallery where they would do a performance with more nuanced gestures and larger patterns and movement structures. Working across disciplines has presented opportunities to plug into this project with a multitude of lenses and approaches for exploring ideas and experimentation in different mediums. It's helped me to see dance, how can it plug into this idea about nonverbal communication and also the environment. Juliet Palmer has agreed to collaborate on an evening-length performance where dance and sound are going to be featured. And of course, I'm very excited, looking forward. Where will this work bring us next?
I grew up in California, where there are lots of western fence lizards, and I remember watching them sunbathing on top of the rocks and them performing their head bobs and push-ups. I had always thought that they were moving like that to get a better view, and this project has really changed my view and understanding of these lizards and other animals and their environments. It turns out the lizards are communicating with their movement gestures, and some of the movement gestures are regionally specific, like a dialect. No, I'm interested in the language of the body and the way it's shaped by its environment. I would also be interested to know what we know about each other based on our body language, and whether or not the environment, our landscape, is revealed through our movement dialects. We know when someone is from Brooklyn or Boston or Louisville or Nashville by the way they speak, right? We can also know things about one another by the way we move, which is a large part of what I'm exploring with this work.
So besides communicating with gesture, Scoloporus lizards also communicate with scent. So Scoloporus actually means scented pores. And fence lizards secrete pheromones from their thighs that they rub on rocks, and they adapt the pheromones that they secrete, apparently, depending on what they're eating and you know, what they're trying to communicate. So I worked with a perfumer, Jessica Hanna, to develop an all-natural perfume based on fence lizard pheromones. And actually, it turns out that the primary scent compounds that are found in fence lizard pheromones are similar to ones that humans find very appealing. So they contain a lot of jasminates, which of course are found in jasmine flowers, as well as pyrazines, which have related compounds in white wine. They give Sauvignon Blanc its distinctive grassy notes. And they're also found in grapefruit, chocolate, and coffee. So the perfume contains these same compounds. It's available for sampling and for sale. And I worked with a glass blower to create this custom bottle for it, which kind of mimics a fence lizard. The perfume is also paired. There's going to be a series of public events which also include perfume sampling and paired with tasting the related compounds in Sauvignon Blanc and also in grapefruit, coffee, flavored chocolates, and jasmine truffles. So that will be later in the run of the exhibition. The wallpaper behind me is actually, again, playing with this idea of to what extent we can, what forms language takes. The idea is that, you know, we don't even know that lizards are communicating unless we have the key. First of all, we need the key, and we also need the sensory apparatus, the physical ability to share the language, to receive the language. So in that case, it's body and it's scent. In the case of much of human language, it's visual, but it's also gestural. It also has to do with scent and taste. We communicate. We have cultural associations and ways of identifying ourselves through these other senses. Sound, of course, is one. The wallpaper is a Magic Eye stereogram that says word. And if you look really closely, the place where it says word is, let me get it right in here. So if you have binocular vision and you've practiced looking at Magic Eye stereograms, the word will emerge throughout as you stare at the wallpaper. I myself don't have binocular vision, so I can't see it, but I've been told it works. It takes some practice. This drawing is a drawing that, again, plays with a human gestural language, American Sign Language, which is the main language for many humans, and it's spelling animal. And over here, this wall actually has a sound installation by composer Juliet Palmer, as well as these scent cones. So these scents, the perfume is embedded in these cones, and you can come up and smell it while listening to the sound, which travels throughout the wall. So it creates a kind of scent and sound synesthesia. Humans have been trained to kind of separate our senses and pay attention to one sense primarily at a time. But there is speculation that both babies and animals actually exist in a world of synesthesia where they don't make distinctions between senses. So this recreates an opportunity to experience that.
I'm composer Juliet Palmer. Fragrance Notes invites us to experience scent and sound simultaneously. The sound installation activates a wall on which ceramic cones offer a chance to inhale Scaloporus lizard perfume. For the sound, 4 improvising vocalists and myself worked our way through a series of lizard perfume fragrance notes, from head notes of grapefruit to heart notes of jasmine and bass notes of chocolate and coffee. The lizard perfume has fragrant overlaps with Sauvignon Blanc as well, so it's another element in our tasting and sounding series.
These photographs are of the mirrored rocks that are in the exhibition. The rocks reflect any environment you place them in, and I'm interested in this correspondence between object and environment, subject and object. One of the things that drew me to this project is that philosopher Martin Heidegger used the lizard's relation to the rock on which it sends and displays itself as the primary example of the difference between humans and animals. For Heidegger, the lizard has a relation to the rock via sensation rather than language. So it seeks out its warmth and establishes it as its territory, but the rock is never experienced as rock because the lizard lacks language, according to Heidegger. But Dr. Martin's research into the gestural language of lizards reopens this question. So with all that in mind, this piece is titled The Heat of the Rock for the Lizard. And it also speculates on what the lizard might know of the rock that we don't know. So there's this larger question of what is knowing? Is sensation also a form of knowing?
All right, I'm Jessie Bella, and I'm one of the collaborators in this project. I was just like very inspired by this project and excited to be asked to be part of it. I really love the premise of it, and it's very close to my heart, especially with thinking about this like interspecies communication, and of course how all species and beings, other animals, have ways of communicating, and they have shared knowledge, and that also as humans we can attempt to communicate in this larger field. So one of the pieces that I made for the show is this sculpture that is like quite totemic. But for me, it was important to elevate the lizard to the top. Again, kind of like getting into taking away all this kind of power that humans have of thinking that we're on top of some sort of hierarchy. And so I was like interested into kind of like within a sculptural sense, flip that hierarchy, right? That the idea that like lizards are also just as humans, a sacred creature, and have their whole like cultural systems and this like, beautiful ancient lineage, just as humans do, even more ancient. So then also I did want to incorporate this idea of communication, and where you see it also like come to play other places in the show with the hands, the robotic hands that actually do the communication systems of the lizards. And of course the handkerchiefs. So here you also have the hands that are in this kind of play or moment of trying to mimic and trying to communicate and learn then from the lizard. So that's kind of the idea behind this piece. One other note about this sculptural piece, it is called Transmission, thinking again about like communication and sending transmissions. But then there's also this component of the neon, which is, sometimes it's a little hard to read with neon with like photographs and even video, but it's blue. So the western fence lizard, you know, they are also called blue belly, and that's part of their communication too. They have this like beautiful vivid blue. So the neon is kind of like coming out much more pronounced in this, but this kind of blue aura that then comes out from the lizard, like projecting. Yeah, and color, right, is such an interesting way of communication. Of course, we also communicate so much within color and color theory, within art. So yeah, I just wanted to really like take note of that like blue moment and having that kind of light transmission coming out. So over here, there are two other pieces that I did in collaboration. One is the lizard chalice, and so this was created for part of the exhibit where there is actually tasting and chocolates, and the chocolates Carla Bengtson makes. So the wine component, it is talking about this like shared sensory experience and certain like fragrance that come out in the lizard's pheromone. That's shared with Sauvignon Blanc. So it's just this great meeting place that we can kind of partake in this sensory experience. And that to me is very exciting. And also that then, of course, it brings into play like the wine glass and the goblet or the chalice, which for me there is a certain kind of ritualistic event in that. Even as simple as like when you have wine and you cheers, you know, there is this like beautiful way of like coming together and kind of reverence for the alcohol and the wine. So I kind of wanted to give it this more sculptural sense. And here the platter, so this is how the chocolate could be served, and the chocolate also, when Carla makes the chocolate, she brings in these like very specific flavors that also are shared by the pheromones of the lizards. So again, I wanted to bring in that kind of more ritualistic side of it, and of sharing food, and of sharing this common kind of sensory experience with lizards. And of course with having like something kind of put on a platter and served. Again, it's just like, it's a moment of pause, it's a moment of gift and reflection and greater reflection. So that's kind of where those pieces came from.
Rock Duet documents one of a series of duets that choreographer Darion Smith and I created outdoors in response to the sonic potential of the lizard's environment. Inspired to enter into a world of nonverbal communication, we created an intuitive language of gesture and sound, resonating logs and rocks, cascading twigs, crunching leaves and moss. Each encounter confirmed the power of sound as nonverbal communication. These conversations between myself, Darion, and the landscape formed the bedrock of a score for a new performance installation led by visual artist Carla Bengtson. As we face an environmental crisis of planetary proportions, a I think that the role of the artist is changing into someone who reimagines a new way to inhabit our world. And I hope that this work can cultivate an ability to listen and to nurture moments of connection, both to each other and to the complexity of the world that sustains us.
My hope is that this project can remind us that meaning making exists not just for humans, but for all kinds of non-human animals, even for this unlikely creature, the lizard, that appears to be so alien to us. I also hope that it reminds us that we too engage the world with our bodies and with our senses, as well as with our minds and words. By shining a light on other living creatures as world-interpreting, socially networked beings, and by drawing attention to the parallel ways in which humans and animals create and perform meaning, we hope that the exhibition will make it more difficult for people to disregard the perspectives, desires, and rights of other species.